"Jake, after 17 years, we're eliminating your position," my boss said, his voice as flat and unyielding as the press shirt he wore. "Clean out your desk by end of day." That was it. No warning, no heartfelt explanation, not even a flicker of emotion. My name is Jake Wilson. I'm 54, and up until that Monday morning, I'd been the senior systems analyst at Meridian Technologies in Columbus, Ohio. For close to 2 decades, I was the backbone of Meridian's IT. I saw it evolve from a scrappy operation in a strip mall, just 2 floors and a leaky roof, to a sprawling 12-story glass monolith downtown. I'd been through 3 CEOs, 5 office moves, and more game-changing initiatives than I could count. Every time the company hit turbulence, I was the one who steadied the ship, working weekends and holidays, skipping vacations, patching systems no one else understood. I never asked for a raise, never even expected a pat on the back. Just did my job, day after day. So when Daniel called me into his office, HR already perched at the corner like vultures. I could smell what was coming before a word was spoken. The air in the office had been heavy with rumors and nervous energy for weeks. I just nodded, keeping my face calm. "I understand," I said. Then I left without a scene, without protest. What was the point? The decision had been made long before I walked through the door. Back at my desk, I could feel the eyes on me, furtive, uncertain. The younger employees, the ones I'd mentored and watched grow, glanced over, then quickly buried their faces in their monitors. News travels at the speed of light in an office. Most of them were good people, eager and bright, but they didn't really know what they were inheriting. The infrastructure running the business, the layers of custom code I'd patched together at 3 a.m. during crises, the arcane scripts that kept ancient databases and cloud solutions talking, all invisible to them. The admin credentials, the crumbling legacy portals, the fragile workarounds that kept operations afloat, none of it in the training manuals. I started packing my life into a box. A family photo, faded at the edges. The lopsided mug my son made in elementary school, cracked but still holding my daily dose of caffeine. The cactus I'd nursed since my first day, a stubborn survivor. One by one, the objects told a story of years spent in the service of company that, in the end, barely looked up to say goodbye. Bethany from marketing hurried over, her face flushed with outrage. "Jake, I just heard. This is insane. You're the reason this place still works." Her voice was rising, drawing curious stares. I held up a hand, giving her a small, tired smile. "It's all right, Bethany." Really, it wasn't all right. But I wasn't about to let my last moments be defined by anger or bitterness. As I made my way to the elevators, Daniel watched from his office door, arms folded. No handshake, no thanks. Just making sure I was actually leaving, like a security guard shepherding out the last stragglers after closing time. What no one seemed to realize was that I'd become the company's true linchpin. Not because I was the smartest in the room, but because I cared more than anyone else. When Meridian faced a legal crisis years ago, I was the one who set up audit trails and compliance protocols. I documented every process, kept meticulous records. I left nothing to chance. When new hires floundered, I quietly fixed their mistakes. When a system failed, I knew exactly which wire to jiggle, which server to reboot. I didn't just keep the lights on. I made sure Meridian could pay its bills, hit its targets, survive the storms. I sat in my car in the parking garage, staring up at the building that had become as familiar as my own home. My security badge, just handed over, had been renewed 16 times. Each renewal felt like a small vote of confidence. Now it was just a useless piece of plastic. The engine hummed quietly as I sat there, my thoughts tumbling over themselves. They had no idea what was coming. By Wednesday, the cracks would start to show. 17 years is a long time. I started at Meridian, the same fall my daughter Olivia began kindergarten. Now she was finishing grad school in Chicago. I had poured myself into this company, turned down better offers, skipped family trips, sacrificed time I'd never get back. Andrea, my wife, used to joke the servers were my other kids. She wasn't wrong. I knew every system, every workaround, every ugly patch, every backdoor fix that management never even heard about. when the company got acquired, when new execs came in with big plans and bigger egos. I was the one who translated their dreams into reality, or at least into something that wouldn't crash the business. Daniel, my boss for the last 5 years, was a different breed. The type who called people resources and spoke of streamlining and efficiency as if they were sacred. He never understood that IT wasn't just about hardware and code. It was about people, about institutional memory, about knowing which wires not to cross. I tried to brief him on the legacy systems, the delicate dependencies they'd inherited. He'd nod, half listening, then pivot back to his favorite buzzwords: future-proofing, digital transformation, agility. He never really heard me. 6 months ago, Daniel brought in Jason Phillips, consultant, young, sharp, expensive suit, hair always perfectly in place, a Stanford degree splashed across his LinkedIn. He and Daniel started having closed-door meetings, voices dropping to whispers the minute I walked by. The writing was on the wall, but I pretended not to see it, hoping, maybe, that my loyalty would count for something. A few months back, I noticed my access being trimmed. A privilege here, an admin right there. Subtle but unmistakable. I could have spoken up, made a fuss. Instead, I watched. I took notes. Andrea noticed a change in me. We'd sit on the porch in the evenings after dinner, her hand resting on mine. "You seem distracted lately. Everything okay at work?" she'd ask. I'd take a long sip of my beer, staring out at the yard. "Just changes," I'd say. Nothing I haven't seen before. But this time it felt different. I wasn't just being ignored. I was being erased piece by piece. Then, late one night, I stumbled across something troubling. A memo buried in a shared drive outlining modernization initiatives. A reorganization. Jason Phillips named as head of IT. My job vanished from the org chart. The same day, while running a routine security audit. Something no one else bothered with. I noticed suspicious transactions in the financial software. Regular payments to a vendor I'd never heard of, Apex Solutions Group. Quick research revealed it was a shell company, less than a year old, address traced to a UPS store in a strip mall. That's when the situation shifted from personal to something much bigger. I realized I was looking at more than just a layoff or a changing of the guard. There was something rotten beneath the surface. Something the new regime was either orchestrating or turning a blind eye to. I started collecting evidence, piecing together a trail that pointed to fraud, or worse. As I drove home that day, the sense of loss was sharp, but so was the sense of purpose. Meridian had cast me aside, but they had underestimated me, and the depth of knowledge, history, and leverage I carried with me. I wasn't out for revenge, but I wasn't about to let what I'd built be destroyed by people who saw everything as disposable. Wednesday would be interesting, all right, not just for me, but for everyone who thought the foundation could be pulled out without consequence. Some legacies don't go quietly. Some stories demand an ending. The payments start out innocuous, just a couple of unremarkable entries lost in the churn of the monthly ledger, as easy to overlook as background noise. But with each passing month, the numbers inched up little increments, never enough to draw the auditor's eye, but just enough to leave a faint trail for anyone meticulous enough to notice. I kept silent. That was always my way. I logged each transaction, photocopied every document, kept files, physical and digital, tucked away just in case. I'd learned long ago that people ignore the quiet ones at the edge of the room. They assume you're checked out, disengaged, maybe even a little dull. But in truth, it's the quiet ones who see everything, who pick up on what others are too busy or too arrogant to notice. The day after Meridian let me go, I found myself in my home office, the silence almost echoing now that there was no early alarm, no scramble to beat traffic or wolf down a rush breakfast. Just me, my laptop, and the peculiar emptiness that comes from suddenly being cut loose. Andrea patted in, her hair still mussed from sleep, and set a steaming mug on my desk. She didn't try to talk, just gave me a look, a blend of empathy and resolve that only comes from nearly 2 decades together. She knows when words are useless and when I need space. She gathered her purse and keys, paused at the door. "I'm heading to the store. Need anything?" I shook my head, grateful for her calm, and after she left, I reached into bottom drawer, a spot nobody else would think to check, and pulled out a flash drive. Over the years, I'd stashed several there, more out of habit than expectation. Officially, I wasn't supposed to have company data at home. The policy spelled that out, loud and clear, but back when legal was fixated on insider threats, I'd managed to get permission for off-site backups. They'd signed a paper, then promptly forgotten about it. That lapse was my insurance now. I plugged in the drive, the familiar whir of data spinning up oddly comforting, and began to sort through the mass of files. Emails, meeting minutes, financial statements most employees would never lay eyes on. The sheer volume was staggering, a testament to how much I quietly collected over the years. It didn't take long for the pattern to crystallize. Payments to Apex Solutions Group, steady monthly, but the total was staggering. Over $1.8 million funneled to them in just 18 months. Every invoice, every approval, pointed straight back to Brian Wilcox, our CFO. I started cross-referencing, matching dates, dissecting the amounts, pulling up the original contract for software renewals. The markups were always just subtle enough, never more than 20% over the industry standard, but enough to raise margins and skim profit, not enough to draw accusations of outright fraud on their own. But if you look closer, the numbers told a different story. Curiosity drove me to dig deeper. I pulled up Apex's business registration, expecting to see a faceless LLC. Instead, there was Thomas Wilcox listed as the owner. One quick search brought up a family photo on social media. Brian and Thomas, side by side at a barbecue, tagged by Brian's wife, brother-in-law. Suddenly, everything snapped into place. They were manipulating expenses, using just enough legitimate business to hide the fake markups and quietly pocket the difference. I sat back, feeling a cold, surgical sort of clarity wash over me. Not anger, not even betrayal. Just a steely realization that I'd spent 17 years quietly fixing other people's messes, making sure the gears kept turning. I'd never caused a scene, never demanded credit. And for all that, I was tossed out with yesterday's garbage, replaced like a malfunctioning part. My phone buzzed on the desk. Stephen, the junior analyst I'd taken under my wing, sent a message. Sorry about yesterday. Total BS what they did. Phillips is already moving into your old office. I stared at the screen, not bothering to reply. It all made sense now. Daniel, the CEO, and the CFO, they needed me out of the way before someone started piecing together what I'd already figured out. They assumed I'd just slink away, oblivious to the real machinations. They had no idea what they'd set in motion. I opened up a new email, started drafting a message to the board of directors, laying out the fraud. Every detail, every document, laid out in irrefutable sequence. But as I reread my words, I hesitated. It was too obvious, too easy to dismiss as the ramblings of a disgruntled ex-employee. They'd circle the wagons, maybe even bury the evidence. I needed leverage, not just proof, but a way to make sure they couldn't brush aside what I found. I deleted the draft, heart pounding with a new kind of resolve. Tomorrow was Wednesday. The board would be meeting, reviewing quarterly numbers, approving bonuses. Everyone important would be in the same room. The timing was perfect. That night, I barely slept. My mind ran through scenarios, rehearsing the moves and counter-moves. I pictured each board member, each executive, weighing their loyalty against self-preservation. By morning, I'd made my plan. I parked across from Meridian's glass and steel headquarters, laptop open on the passenger seat. I logged into an old email account, one I created years ago for penetration testing. It looked like an internal address, but it wasn't on any directory. At 9:15, as the board filed in, I sent a concise, urgent message to Daniel. Financial irregularities. Urgent review needed. I included just enough about the Apex payments to rattle him, but left out the family connection. If Daniel was complicit, he'd scramble. If he wasn't, he'd start asking questions. Either way, I'd force their hand. By 9:45, Daniel was calling. I let it ring, watching the number flash and fade. He left a voicemail. Jake, we need to discuss your email immediately. Call me back. I didn't. Instead, I drove to a nearby coffee shop, ordered something bitter and black, and sat up at a corner table. At 10:30, an email appeared from Vanessa in HR. Mr. Wilson, we received concerning communication from you that potentially violates your separation agreement. Please cease all contact with Meridian employees and remember your confidentiality obligations. Any further communications may result in legal action. So that was their play. Threaten, intimidate, try to scare me into silence. The irony was rich. I never signed a separation agreement, never agreed to any gag order. They were bluffing. At noon, I drove to my bank and opened my safe deposit box. Inside, among some old family papers and a tarnished watch, was another backup drive. This one was older, but it was a treasure trove. Copies of audit logs, emails, even a few recordings I'd made during tense meetings when I suspected something was off. The sort of material I'd never risk leaving on a regular drive, but kept for an occasion just like this. I slid the drive into my pocket, feeling its weight. I knew Meridian's leadership would try to bury this, to paint me as a bitter ex-employee or a disgruntled nobody. But I also knew something else. The truth has a way of surfacing, especially when you spend your whole career learning how to document everything quietly, methodically, while everyone else is looking the other way. For years, I'd been invisible. Now, for the first time, I had the power to decide just how visible I wanted to be, and how much damage I was willing to do. Mixed in with the files were the original security protocols I'd painstakingly assembled over the years, document after document spelling out, in no uncertain terms, exactly who had access to which systems, when changes were authorized, and the rationale for every permissions update. It had always been my insurance policy, a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight back to anyone who tried to bend the rules. As I flipped through the pages, my posture stiffened. One particular authorization request jumped out at me. Brian Wilcox himself had signed off on a request for expanded privileges in the financial approval systems, time-stamped a year and a half ago. The timing couldn't have been more telling. Almost exactly when the first irregular transactions to Apex Solutions Group began appearing in the ledgers. Back at my apartment, the atmosphere was electric with tension. My phone was lit up, vibrating ceaselessly on the coffee table. 3 missed calls blinked accusingly. Daniel, Vanessa, and now, surprisingly, Jason Phillips. That last name made me pause. Jason had always maintained a careful distance from internal politics, but now he was on the offensive, calling within minutes of the news spreading. It meant the situation was escalating faster than I'd anticipated. I thumbed through my inbox, and sure enough, a new message from Steven sat at the top, flagged urgent in red. Jake, they're saying you blasted out some email accusing the company of financial fraud. Phillips just called an emergency meeting. Everyone's losing their minds. They're locking down all your accounts, even the legacy stuff from the old system. We're supposed to take over your open projects, but nobody knows what's going on. What should I do? Poor Steven. He was barely out of college, just getting his bearings, and now he was caught up in a storm he never saw coming. I hammered out a quick reply, not wanting to draw him any deeper into the crossfire. Don't get involved, Steven. Just keep your head down and observe. At 3 p.m., the landline rang, a number I hadn't given out for work in years. I let it ring twice, then picked up, saying nothing. Jake, it's Brian Wilcox. His voice was steady, but behind the practiced composure, I sensed a strain. We need to discuss your concerns. I think there's been a misunderstanding, and I'd like to clear the air. Is that what you're calling it now? I replied, keeping my tone even. He pressed on, undeterred. Transitions can be turbulent. If you have questions about company finances, there are established channels. The board. I cut him off with silence, letting the weight of the moment hang. He tried to fill the void, his tone shifting ever so slightly. The board doesn't need to be distracted by operational noise. Why don't we meet tomorrow? Just the 2 of us. I'm sure we can sort this out. Sorry, can't make it. Tomorrow's packed, I said. The edge of my voice was unmistakable. And actually, I think the board should hear about Apex Solutions Group and your brother-in-law's involvement. He drew in a sharp, involuntary breath. That reaction told me more than any denial ever could. I could almost hear him recalculating, searching for a new angle. "You're making a serious mistake," he said finally, the pretense dropping. "This can still be resolved amicably. We can offer you a generous severance, glowing references, whatever it takes to help you transition quietly." "Not interested, Brian," I replied, and hung up before he could say more. Within 10 minutes, Vanessa fired off another email, this one far more official in tone. Suddenly, my severance package had doubled, attached to a fresh agreement. Total confidentiality regarding all company matters, past, present, and future. They were moving fast now, trying to contain the fallout, still convinced they could buy my silence and sweep everything under the rug. They thought they were facing a disgruntled employee looking for a payout. They had no idea what was really coming. That night, sleep was out of question. Fueled by adrenaline and a sense of grim determination, I dug deeper into the records, following new leads I'd overlooked in my initial pass. Thursday morning, bleary-eyed but resolute, I saw the full scope of the operation. Brian's scheme with Apex was only the most recent layer. 3 years earlier, shortly after he took over as CFO, another shell vendor had appeared, Lakeside Business Solutions. The pattern was familiar. Consulting fees for vaguely described work, invoices inflated to absurd levels, payments routed through accounts that never matched up with actual project milestones. When I pulled Lakeside's business registration, the name at the top was Patricia Wilcox, Brian's wife. The company had no website, no staff directory, just a virtual office address and a phone number that went straight to voicemail. It was a facade, designed with just enough legitimacy to pass a cursory audit. But the real gut punch came from a cache of archived emails. Daniel, the operations director everyone trusted, wasn't just an unwitting bystander. He was an active collaborator. He'd been the architect of several budget reallocations, giving his department plush increases, while others faced inexplicable cutbacks. The paper trail showed he'd been brought in specifically after the last IT director began probing into runaway vendor costs and asking uncomfortable questions about who was approving what. That director had quietly resigned under amicable circumstances, but the timing was suspicious now in retrospect. Even Jason Phillips, the consultant with a sterling reputation, fit neatly into the puzzle. His firm had been awarded the contract through a shadow process that bypassed standard procurement controls. The real reason for his engagement became clear. He was there to orchestrate my removal, the last obstacle between a fraud and total impunity. The scheme's brilliance lay in its simplicity. They'd set up legitimate-looking vendors, created just enough actual deliverables to avoid raising red flags, and padded the bills to siphon off millions. The auditors saw the work getting done, at least on paper, and never looked deeper. Over 3 years, they'd extracted a staggering $4.3 million, splitting it through a web of family connections and shell accounts. With the evidence laid out, spreadsheets tracing the cash flow, business registrations linking the fake vendors to Brian's family, emails tying Daniel to the approval process, I realized I had enough to bring the whole operation down. But instead of going straight to HR or compliance, both thoroughly compromised, I decided to play my last card. I reached out to Robert Chin, a board member who'd always struck me as both sharp and incorruptible. Years ago, we'd worked together rolling out new security protocols. He was semi-retired now, attending board meetings mostly out of sense of duty. Jake Wilson. He answered after 2 rings. His voice was warm but cautious. "Long time, Jake. I heard you left Meridian last week." "Not exactly by choice," I replied. "Robert, I need 15 minutes. This is bigger than a routine audit." He paused, considering. "This have anything to do with why Brian and Daniel have been whispering in corners and looking like they're about to jump out of their skins? The board meeting got pretty heated yesterday." "Yeah, that'd be related." He let out a low chuckle. "I always figured you were the only one who really understood where the skeletons were buried. What do you want to meet?" We arranged to meet in a quiet park, 3 miles from headquarters, neutral ground, no chance of being overheard. I brought a sealed envelope containing a printed summary and a flash drive with every document, every email, every spreadsheet. "This is everything," I said, handing it over. Names, dates, payment trails, even the shell company registrations. "I'm not here for revenge or money. I just want the board to see the truth in act. I want the right people to be held accountable. Robert regarded me carefully, weighing my words. Why bring this to me, Jake? Why not the audit committee or legal? Because you actually read the reports. You ask the hard questions in meetings. You're not afraid to dig beneath the surface. Everyone else is either compromised or too scared to get involved. He nodded, slow and grave. There's an emergency board session tomorrow. Finance committee is already reviewing anomalies from the past quarter. This, he held up the envelope, will make a difference. As I walked away from the park, I felt a weight lifting, replaced by a new tension. What would happen next was out of my hands. But for the first time in months, I felt like the truth was finally in motion. Nice timing, Jake, he said, slipping the envelope into his pocket with a glance over his shoulder. If this checks out, there'll be fallout. I'm counting on it. He gave a curt nod, the kind that meant business was far from done. As I turned away, the weight of the moment pressed in, my mind already racing ahead to the next steps. Heading back to my car, the late afternoon sun caught the windshield, making me squint. My phone buzzed, Andrea again. Some guy named Jason Phillips stopped by the house looking for you. Said it was urgent. I told him you weren't home. She sounded tense, but steady. Clearly, they were starting to panic. Good. The fish were thrashing, finally feeling the hook. That afternoon, my inbox pinged with job offers from 2 rival firms. Both roles were leaps above anything I'd held before. Director level, substantial signing bonuses. The kind of perks that would have had me jumping at the chance just a week ago. Word travels fast when you suddenly hit the market, especially if you leave a company under a cloud of controversy. HR heads and recruiters were circling, sensing opportunity, perhaps hoping to poach secrets as much as skills. I ignored them. This wasn't about career advancement or cashing in on my sudden notoriety. I needed to see this through, to finish what they'd started when they made the mistake of underestimating me. That night, I sat in my small home office, the air thick with anticipation, using company credentials that, honestly, should have been deactivated the minute I walked out. Sloppy Jason. I slipped into the company's email server one last time. My heart pounded, but my hands were steady. I set up a message, scheduled for every board member's inbox at precisely 8 a.m. the next morning. Before you sign off on those 2 bonuses, read this, I wrote. My full report was attached. Every document, every transaction, every damning detail. No more secrets, no more hidden ledgers. If they wanted the truth, they'd get it in black and white. Friday arrived clear and bright, a deceptive calm before the storm. I sat on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the neighborhood wake up. For the first time in years, there was no alarm, no commute, just a quiet certainty that today would change everything. At exactly 8 o'clock, my email hit all the board members. I imagined their faces as the message landed, the slow dawning realization as they opened the files. By 8:17, my phone started lighting up. Numbers I didn't know, likely assistants scrambling to contain the fallout or to beg for clarity. I let every call roll to voicemail, a small act of control in a day that would soon spin out of theirs. At 9 o'clock, the Emergency Finance Committee meeting would kick off. Robert Chin would be there, my carefully compiled documentation in hand, watching as the email sent shockwaves through the room. I pictured the board members' reactions. Disbelief, anger, maybe a few, quietly relieved that someone else had finally blown the whistle. At 9:32, Stephen texted, "Police are here. Will Cox and Daniel being questioned in conference rooms. Phillips looks sick. What did you do?" I didn't answer. Everything was unfolding exactly as I planned. For the first time in months, I felt the pressure start to ease off my chest. By 10 o'clock, Meridian's general counsel called. This time I picked up. "Mr. Wilson, this is Patricia Graves from Legal. We need you to come in immediately to discuss information you provided to the board." Her tone was clipped urgent, but laced with an underlying note of respect, or maybe caution. "I'm available by phone," I said, my voice calm, almost attached. "This really requires an in-person discussion." "No, it doesn't." I cut in, firm but polite. "Everything I know is in that report. Everything is already backed up in several secure places. If anything happens to me or my family, more copies go to the SEC, IRS, and 3 news outlets. There was a long silence, the kind where you know calculations are being made on the other end of the line. Finally, she spoke, her voice flat and careful. The board is taking this extremely seriously. Several executives are already on administrative leave pending investigation. They'd appreciate your cooperation. I've given you everything. My part's done. I hung up, feeling the balance of power shift, however slightly. After the call, I drove to a diner 20 minutes outside Columbus, a place where nobody knew my name or my story. I sat at the counter, the smell of frying bacon and burnt coffee grounding me. No need to make myself easy to find. Over lunch, news alerts started popping up on local business sites. Meridian Technologies execs under investigation for financial irregularities. No names yet, but that was coming. I watched a young couple at the next booth laugh over pancakes, blissfully unaware that someone's world was unraveling just a few miles away. At 2 o'clock, Robertson called. No preamble, just the facts. It's a bloodbath. Brian confessed as soon as we showed him your evidence. Now he's trying to cut a deal, blaming Daniel for pressuring him. Daniel's denying everything. Phillips claims he was just a consultant. Didn't know a thing about the finances. Board isn't buying it. All 3 are suspended pending further investigation. The forensic accountants start Monday. Early numbers say at least $4.5 million diverted over 3 years, maybe more. I nodded to myself, a small grim satisfaction. I'd been closer than they ever imagined. Robert went on, his voice a mix of relief and exhaustion. The board wants to talk about bringing you back, not just to your old job. They're creating a new chief security officer position, reporting straight to the board. It was the kind of offer that came once in a career, the ultimate vindication. I'd suspected something like this might happen, but to hear it confirmed still caught me off guard. I'll think about it, I told him. For the first time, I had leverage, the kind that didn't come from titles or paychecks, but from having done what no one else would. That night, I told Andrea everything. I laid out the whole story, start to finish, holding nothing back. She listened quietly, her eyes never leaving mine, and asked, "What do you want to do?" The question lingered. The revenge part was over. The people who'd forced me out were being forced out themselves, staring down the barrel of criminal charges and public disgrace. Justice, sharp and cold, had been served. But going back to Meridian meant returning to a place that had tossed me aside after 17 years. 17 years of loyalty, late nights, and missed family dinners. Could I really do that? Did I even want to? I need some time, I finally said, realizing how heavy the choice weighed on me. Later, I opened my laptop and posted a single line to my mostly silent LinkedIn. Never burn bridges. Just let them collapse under their own greed. Within minutes, old co-workers started reaching out. Some with congratulations, others with cautious curiosity. Word was out. The quiet systems guy had toppled 3 executives without ever raising his voice. By Monday, everyone would know who they'd underestimated, and the story would ripple through offices and boardrooms for years. I wondered how many others were silently enduring, waiting for their own moment. Monday morning, I walked into Meridian's headquarters in a suit I hadn't worn in years. The lobby felt different, the air charged with something like respect, or maybe wariness. The security guard did a double take, then printed out a visitor badge. "Welcome back, Mr. Wilson," he said, with a new kind of respect. The elevator ride up to the executive floor was quiet, each floor marked by a soft chime. I'd never had a reason to visit this level before, never been part of the inner sanctum. As the door slid open, I stepped out, knowing that this time I was here on my terms. Now it was my turn to walk into the boardroom. The double doors swung quietly shut behind me, closing off the low murmur of the waiting area. 10 board members sat in a semicircle around a table so polished it shone like a black mirror, warping my reflection into a nervous stranger. Their eyes tracked me as I crossed the carpet. Robert Chun, silver-haired and inscrutable, gave me a subtle nod, a small gesture, but I clung to it. The interim CEO, Maria Gutierrez, who'd stepped up from COO after everything exploded, sat at the head of the table. She looked as if she'd rather be anywhere else, jaws set, hands tight around a stack of documents. "Mr. Wilson," she began, but her voice warbled, betraying her nerves. She shuffled the papers, searching for the right spot to begin. Decisions were made. According to our system logs and these authorization records, Brian Wilcox personally requested expanded access to the financial approval systems about 18 months ago. That's exactly when the Apex payments started appearing. Her words hung in the air, heavier than the silence that followed. Some board members glanced at each other. A few scribbled notes. I could feel the weight of suspicion and confusion swirling around me, and for a moment, I almost pitied Maria. She was caught in the crossfire, not quite sure which direction the bullets were coming from. Back home, the afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, striping my living room in gold. 3 missed calls blinked on my phone: Daniel, Vanessa, and, unexpectedly, Jason Phillips. Jason never called unless he had something to gain. His quick response was telling. Interesting. I opened my laptop and checked my personal email. At the top, one message stood out. Stephen had flagged it urgent. "Jake, people are saying you sent some wild email about financial fraud. Phillips just called an emergency meeting. It's all anyone's talking about. They're cutting off your access to everything, even old records. We need to do our jobs. What's going on?" Stephen was young, sharp, but risk-averse, the sort of guy who triple-checked his work and kept his head down. I almost felt sorry for him, caught in the undertow. I typed a short reply. "Don't get involved, Stephen. Just watch." At 3 p.m., my home phone rang, a number I hadn't used for work in years, a relic from the company directory. I picked up, silent, heart thumping. "Jake, it's Brian Wilcox." His tone was level, almost soothing, but I heard the strain underneath. "We should talk about your concerns. I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Is that what you call it?" I said, letting the words hang. He pressed on, voice tightening. "Look, transition periods are tough. You know that. If you have questions about the finances, there are proper channels, like the board." I cut him off with silence, letting him fill the void. Finally, he said, "The board doesn't need to get bogged down with operational details. Why don't we meet tomorrow? Just you and me. We can clear this up." "Sorry, I'm busy tomorrow," I said. "And honestly, I think the board will be very interested in Apex Solutions Group and your brother-in-law." In the pause that followed, I heard him inhale a sharp, involuntary gasp. It was all the confirmation I needed. "You're making a serious mistake," he said, the veneer slipping. "We can make this right. Generous severance, references, whatever you want. No need to drag this out. It's better for everyone." "Goodbye, Brian," I said, and ended the call. Not 10 minutes later, Vanessa emailed again. The tone was suddenly warm, even apologetic. My severance package had doubled, with a new agreement attached. Total confidentiality, no exceptions. They were scrambling now, moving fast, thinking they could buy my silence. They believed this was just about leverage, a bigger payout. They had no idea how deep this went. Thursday dawned gray and quiet, but I felt a clarity I hadn't known in weeks. I'd spent the night piecing together old files, cross-checking spreadsheets, running down names and numbers I'd ignored before. The Apex scheme wasn't Brian's first game, just the latest in a line of calculated thefts. 3 years ago, not long after Brian became CFO, I traced another pattern, a slow drip of consulting fees to a company called Lakeside Business Solutions. The invoices were vague, strategic advisory, operational review, but the amounts were always round numbers, just under the threshold for extra scrutiny. I pulled the registration documents for Lakeside. The address was a virtual mailbox in a city we'd never done business in. The CEO was listed as Patricia Wilcox, Brian's wife. No real office, no staff, no web presence. It was a shell, plain and simple. But the real revelation came from the email archives. Buried in old threads, I found messages between Daniel and Brian discussing how to justify the new vendors, how massage the numbers and keep the auditors at bay. Daniel wasn't just a bystander. He was an active participant. In exchange for his help, his department got budget increases, while everyone else faced cuts. They brought him in after the last IT director started asking questions about inflated tech spending and was quietly pushed out. Even Jason Phillips, the so-called change management consultant, was entangled. His company had been hired through a loophole that bypassed the normal approval process. He wasn't there to modernize anything. He was there to facilitate layoffs and create enough disruption that nobody would notice the financial patterns. His role was to get rid of anyone, like me, who might dig too deep. It was almost too neat. Set up fake vendors, approve padded invoices, funnel the money out, split the proceeds. Enough legitimate work was done to pass a cursory audit, but the real profit was siphoned off through overbilling and shell companies. Over 3 years, they'd moved just over $4.3 million out of Meridian's accounts, disguised as consulting IT upgrades and operational efficiencies. I assembled everything. Payment records showing the spikes, business registrations linking the shells to Brian's family, emails proving Daniel's role, and contracts with Jason's firm. I laid it all out in a report, annotated, cross-referenced, impossible to ignore. Then I did what they'd never expect. I called Robert Chun. Years ago, we'd worked together on a tricky security project. He was mostly retired now, showing up at board meetings more out of habit than duty. But he was sharp, and more importantly, he paid attention. He answered on the second ring. "Jake Wilson," he said with a faint note of surprise. "Long time. Heard you left Meridian." "Not exactly my idea." I replied, "Robert, I need 15 minutes. It's important." He went quiet. I could almost hear him weighing the situation. This about why Brian and Daniel had been huddled together looking worried? Board meeting was tense yesterday. "Probably," I said. He laughed, a dry, knowing sound. "Always figured you knew where the bodies were buried. Where do you want to meet?" An hour later, we sat on a bench in a quiet park 3 miles from headquarters. I handed him a sealed envelope and a flash drive. "That's everything," I told him. "Dates, amounts, connections, emails. I'm not after my job. I don't want to pay out. I just want the right people to know the truth. Robert, Meridian deserves better than this." He studied me for a long moment, his eyes narrowed, weighing intent against risk. "Why come to me, Jake?" "Because you actually read the audit reports. I've seen you ask the right questions when everyone else is just rubber stamping. You care what happens here, even if it's not your problem anymore." He nodded, slowly, as if coming to a decision. "You did your homework. This is solid." His tone softened. "You know, most people would have taken the money and walked away. Why didn't you?" I looked out across the empty field, the wind stirring the grass. "Because I built things here. Because people trust the company with their livelihoods. Someone has to draw a line." He nodded again, more firmly this time, and slipped the envelope into his briefcase. "All right, Jake. I'll make sure the board gets this, the Real board, not the ones with something to hide." For the first time in weeks, I felt the knot in my chest begin to loosen. The fight wasn't over, but the truth was finally in the right hands. There's an emergency board session scheduled for tomorrow. Finance committee review, something they could no longer avoid. "Convenient timing, Jake," he muttered, stuffing the envelope I'd handed him into his pocket as though it might catch fire. "If this checks out, there'll be serious consequences." I met his stare without flinching. "I'm counting on it," I replied, and I meant every word. On my walk back to the car, the air heavy with anticipation, my phone buzzed. Andrea again. She sounded tense. Some guy, Jason Phillips, had just shown up at our house, asking for me by name. He'd insisted it was urgent. Andrea, calm as ever, told him I was out. I could picture the scene. Phillips on the porch, desperate, probably sweating through his shirt. They were running out of options, and I wanted them to feel the pressure. Good. Let them scramble for once. Later that afternoon, I received 2 job offers from rival firms, both a step above my former position, both with generous signing bonuses and perks that would have made my old self giddy. Word of my abrupt exit had made the rounds, and now everyone seemed eager to scoop up the guy who had made Meridian systems hum for years. I didn't even pause to consider them. This wasn't about climbing another rung on the corporate ladder. I had unfinished business. I needed to see this through, for myself and for everyone who had put their trust in me. As dusk settled, I logged into the company's email server with credentials that, by all rights, should have been revoked months ago. Meridian's IT department had always been a step behind. Another oversight, another crack in their armor. Sloppy Jason. I worked quickly, setting up a message addressed to every member of the board, scheduled precisely for 8 a.m. The subject line was simple, impossible to ignore. Before you approve Q2 bonuses, read this. My full report, meticulously documented, was attached. Every number, every name, every thread that tied the fraud together. Friday morning dawned bright and cloudless. I sat on the porch with a mug of coffee, watching neighbors take their dogs out and kids race to the bus stop. No alarms, no frantic commute, just a sense of calm anticipation. At the stroke of 8 o'clock, my email hit the board's inboxes. It didn't take long for the reactions to start. By 8:17, my phone was a hive of activity, unfamiliar numbers, likely the nervous assistance of board members. I let every call slide to voicemail. My part was done. Now it was their turn to react. By 9 o'clock, the Emergency Finance Committee meeting was underway. Robert Chin would be there, my documentation front and center, waiting for the inevitable explosion. At 9:32, Stephen texted, "Police are here. Will Cox and Daniel being questioned in conference rooms. Phillips looked sick. What did you do?" I smiled at my phone, but didn't respond. The dominoes were falling exactly as I planned. At 10 o'clock, the call I'd been waiting for came through. Meridian's general counsel, Patricia Graves. This one, I answered. "Mr. Wilson, this is Patricia Graves from Legal. We need you to come in immediately to discuss the information you provided to the board." "I'm available by phone," I replied, unwavering. "This really requires an in-person discussion." "No, it doesn't," I interrupted, my tone measured but resolute. "Everything I know is in that report, and everything I have is already backed up in several secure locations. If anything happens to me or my family, extra copies are set to go straight to the SEC, IRS, and 3 major news outlets." There was a pause, long enough to feel like a threat. Then she spoke, voice tightly controlled. "Mr. Wilson, the board is taking this very seriously. Several executives are already on administrative leave pending an investigation. They would appreciate your cooperation." "I've cooperated fully," I said. "You have everything. My part's done." She hung up, and I felt a weight lift. I drove to a diner 20 minutes outside Columbus, choosing a seat by the window. No point making myself easy to track down. Over a plate of eggs and hash browns, I watched headlines begin to appear on local business sites. Meridian Technologies executives under investigation for financial irregularities. No names yet, but I knew that would change. The city had a way of chewing up secrets and spitting out the truth piece by piece. At 2 o'clock, Robertson called, the tension in his voice unmistakable. "It's a bloodbath," he said, skipping any greeting. "Brian confessed the moment we put your evidence in front of him, trying to make a deal, pointing fingers at Daniel for pressuring him. Daniel's denying everything. Phillips says he was just a consultant, claims he didn't know a thing. The board isn't buying it. All 3 are suspended until further notice. Forensic accountants start Monday. Early estimate, at least $4.5 million to siphon off over the past 3 years. Could be more." I nodded, not surprised. I'd been tracking the numbers for months. Each discrepancy another breadcrumb. "The board wants to talk to you," Robert continued, "about coming back. Not to your old job. They're creating a new chief security officer role, reporting directly to the board." I'd expected something like this, but hearing it out loud still caught me off guard. "I'll think about it," I managed. That evening, I sat across from Andrea and told her everything. The secrets, the risks, the choices I'd made. She listened without interruption, her expression thoughtful. When I finished, she looked at me with that steady gaze I'd always relied on and asked, "What do you want to do now?" That was the question, wasn't it? The revenge, the justice. They were done. The architects of my downfall were now facing their own reckoning. The same cold bureaucracy they'd weaponized against me now turned on them. But to go back? To return to the company that had discarded me after 17 years of loyalty? Could I trust them, not as colleagues, but as people? Could I trust myself not to get pulled under by the same currents that had dragged them all down? I need time, I said, realizing how true it was. Later, I opened my old laptop, brushed dust from the keyboard, and posted a single line to my dusty LinkedIn profile. Never burn bridges. Just let them collapse under the weight of their own greed. Within minutes, messages poured in, ex-colleagues, recruiters, even a couple of former adversaries. Word traveled fast. The quiet systems guy, the one they'd overlooked, underestimated, dismissed, had toppled 3 executives without raising his voice. By Monday, the entire company would know who'd pulled the thread that unraveled the whole tapestry. Monday morning, I put on a suit I hadn't worn in years, the fabric stiff at the shoulders, the tie a little tight at the neck. I paused at the mirror, studying the lines on my face, the set of my jaw. I looked older, maybe, but also sharper, more defined. I drove to Meridian's headquarters, parked in my old spot, and walked inside. At the reception desk, the security guard did a double-take, then broke into a nervous smile as he rushed to print me a visitor badge. "Welcome back, Mr. Wilson," he said, handing it over with hands that trembled just slightly. There was a new respect in his voice, a recognition that things had changed, that I had changed. And as I walked through those glass doors, past the curious stares and whispered conversations, I realized that sometimes the only way to rebuild is to start from the ashes of what you've burned down, and the choices you make on the other side matter more than anything that came before. The elevator's climb was slow, each floor flashing past with muted beep. I was acutely aware of my own reflection in the polished chrome doors, tie a little crooked, heart thumping harder than I'd admit. 17 years in this company, and the executive floor had always been a rumor, a place for whispered power plays. Not for someone like me. But now, summoned for the first time, I was expected in the boardroom. The ground zero of the crisis I'd uncovered. Inside, the room was colder than I'd imagined, all glass and steel, the city skyline stretching out behind the board members. 10 of them sat around a table so glossy it reflected every nervous gesture. I caught Robert Chen's eye as I entered. He offered a small, encouraging nod. At the head of the table, the interim COO, Margaret, who'd been COO until the whole thing blew up, looked exhausted, her jaw tight, eyes darting like she'd rather be anywhere but here. The sense of tension was palpable, heavy enough to make the air feel thick. "Mr. Wilson," she began, her voice formal but frayed at the edges. "Thank you for coming. The situation you uncovered is unprecedented." I stood silent, letting her fill the awkward space. No need to help them out. The fraud is bigger than we first thought. The forensic team found nearly $5.2 million in diverted funds. Criminal charges are in motion. The silence after that was almost a relief. I could feel their eyes on me, searching for some sign of what I was thinking. But I kept my face blank, my posture steady. Let them wonder. After months of being ignored, I was done making things easy. Robert cleared his throat, breaking the tension. "Jake, the board voted unanimously to create a new position, Chief Information Security Officer, full executive privileges. You'd report straight to us. We want you for the job." I moved forward and set my folder on the table. Its contents a result of too many sleepless nights and hard lessons learned. "My terms are inside," I said quietly, not up for negotiation. Margaret opened the folder, flipping through the pages. Her eyebrows shot up as she read. Full audit authority for all departments. Independent budget veto over financial tech. I nodded. It's unusual, yeah. So is losing $5.2 million because no one was watching? That won't happen again, not if I'm in charge. Silence again. But this time it wasn't ignorance. It was consideration, calculation. I could almost hear the mental gears turning. Some part of me pitted them. They'd spent years trusting the wrong people, and now they had to decide if they could trust me, the guy who'd blown the whistle and nearly blew up the company in the process. "You've got until noon," I said. Standing, "I have other options." I did, too. A couple of headhunters had already sniffed out the story and sent quiet feelers. I wasn't desperate, not anymore. As I reached the door, Robert's voice caught me. "Did you plan this, Jake?" I paused, letting the question hang for a moment. I didn't plan to get fired after 17 years. Everything after that, just me doing what I've always done, finding holes in the system and locking them down. I left them sitting with that, the unspoken reminder that sometimes the people worth trusting are the ones who refuse to look away when things go wrong. At 11:47, my phone rang. Robert's number. They'd accepted every condition. No counteroffers, no haggling. I would have smiled, but I was too tired for that. All I felt was vindication. Finally, someone listened. 6 months later, I had a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows. The view stretched over the Columbus skyline, glass, steel, and the slow sprawl of the river. Every morning I'd pause, take it in, and remind myself that nothing was guaranteed, not even redemption. The company was still standing, battered but intact. We'd managed to recover most of the stolen money, enough to keep the doors open, pay the staff, and convince our clients to stay. Brian Wilcox, the architect of the fraud, pled guilty to multiple counts. He turned informant, hoping for a lighter sentence, but he would still go away for a long time. Daniel tried to feign ignorance, swore up and down he had no clue what was happening in his own department. The evidence said otherwise. Jason Phillips ran, to Brazil of all places, but extradition was already in process. No one would be escaping accountability this time. My old team now reported to me. I'd promoted Stephen to manage the day-to-day grind. He was sharp, ambitious, and had more potential than he realized. He just needed someone to believe in him, to give him a shot I'd always wanted and rarely got. Some things had changed, but some things stayed the same. The IT floor still felt like a second home, a maze of terminals and quiet focus. I made it a point to walk the floor every week, to talk to people, to listen. Trust was fragile, and after everything, I knew better than to take it for granted. One afternoon, as I was double-checking the new security protocols for next quarter, a knock sounded at my door. Andrea stood there, a soft smile on her face. "Lunch?" she asked, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I shrugged into my jacket and joined her as we walked through the IT department. Heads turned and conversations dipped, not out of fear, but respect. They all knew what happened. They knew I could have gone public, could have sunk the company, but I hadn't. I'd chosen to save it. In a world obsessed with blame, I'd chosen to fix. In the elevator, Andrea slipped her hand into mine, a simple gesture, but it grounded me. "Happy?" she asked, searching my face. I took a moment before answering. The raw anger I'd felt after being fired, betrayed by people I trusted, had burned away. What remained wasn't quite happiness, but something steadier. Satisfaction. Closure. I nodded. "I'm good," I said, meaning it. We stepped out into the October afternoon. The sun was bright, but the air was crisp, the kind of weather that made you feel awake, alive. We walked toward our usual lunch spot. The familiarity of the routine as comforting as the food we'd order. My phone buzzed, a message from Robert. "Board approved your security budget increase." Unanimous. I smiled, a real one this time. No questions, no resistance. Just trust in my judgment, in my ability to keep the company safe. Andrea noticed my mood shift. "What's up?" "Nothing," I said, slipping my phone back into my pocket. But that wasn't quite true. I was thinking about bridges, the ones that collapse under their own weight, and the ones that, if you rebuild them right, end up stronger than before. The company, my reputation, even my relationship with the people here, all of them had been tested. All had nearly failed. But through the fire, with the right work and the right intentions, we'd made something better. This time, I'd built it right. And I wasn't about to let it fall again. The view from my office swept across the Columbus skyline, towers and rooftops etched against the cloudy blue, an unyielding reminder how abruptly life can change. Not long ago, I'd stare at these same buildings with a different perspective, haunted by uncertainty and the shadow of collapse. Now, with every sunrise, I felt the weight and responsibility of survival, and the strange satisfaction that came from holding things together when everything seemed set to fall apart. Brian Wilcox's name still echoed in the halls. He'd pled guilty, took the full brunt of the fraud charges stacked against him, and in a last act of self-preservation, cut a deal with the feds. He'd become their informant, trading secrets for mercy. It wasn't a get-out-of-jail-free card. His sentence would sting, but it was better than the alternative. Daniel, on the other hand, kept fighting tooth and nail, refusing to admit to any involvement, even as evidence piled up like so many bricks on his chest. Maybe he was innocent, or maybe he was just stubborn enough to gamble everything on denial. And then there was Jason Phillips. He vanished overnight, booking a one-way flight to Brazil, thinking he could outrun consequences. But the law moved faster than he'd anticipated. They caught up with him eventually. Extradition papers signed. His return to face justice inevitable. The stolen money, or most of it, had been traced, seized, and funneled back into the company's accounts. Enough, at least, to keep us afloat, to keep the paychecks coming and the lights on. The threat of bankruptcy had hovered for weeks. But now, the ground beneath us felt a little steadier. The company's old guard, the ones who hadn't jumped ship or gotten caught up in the scandal, now reported to me. The board had made it official. They needed someone they could trust, someone who'd proven they wouldn't abandon ship at the first sign of trouble. I put Stephen in charge of operations. He was young, sharp, and ambitious, a little rough around the edges, but with real promise. He just needed someone to believe in him, to give him a chance to step up. Mentoring him gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't expected. A sharp knock pulled me from my thoughts. Andrea leaned in the doorway, her usual easy smile in place. "Ready for lunch?" she asked. I shrugged on my jacket, feeling the tension in my shoulders ease a bit. We headed out together. As we walked through the IT department, conversations dipped and heads turned. This wasn't fear, not anymore. It was something closer to respect, maybe even gratitude. They knew what had happened, knew that I'd had every reason to let the company crumble, to walk away and leave the mess behind. But I hadn't. I'd stayed, fought, and somehow managed to keep everything from falling apart. That counted for something. In the elevator, Andrea reached over and squeezed my hand. "Happy?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. The anger and resentment that had driven me when I was first forced out had faded. What burned inside me now wasn't happiness. Not exactly, but a deeper sense of fulfillment. The kind that comes after seeing a long, grueling project through to the end. "I'm good," I said, and I meant it. We stepped outside. The October sun was mild, golden light filtering to the trees, just warm enough to make you forget winter was on its way. It felt like an exhale after months of holding my breath. We started walking toward our favorite lunch spot, the sidewalk busy with people whose lives would never intersect with the chaos we'd just survived. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Robert Chen's name flashed on the screen. I paused, thumb hovering before answering. "Board approved your security budget increase." "Unanimous vote," he said, his tone light, almost celebratory. For the first time in months, a genuine smile crept onto my face. The board support wasn't just about the money. It meant they trusted me, believed in the decisions I was making. No questions, no suspicion. Just faith. Andrea noticed a change in my mood instantly. "What is it?" she asked, curiosity and concern mingling on her face. I slipped my phone back in my pocket and shook my head. "Nothing," I said, "just thinking about bridges." She raised an eyebrow, but didn't press. As we walked, I thought about the bridges I'd crossed, and the ones I'd burned, rebuilt, or reinforced along the way. Some structures collapsed under the weight of betrayal and bad choices. Others, if you took the time to mend them, to lay each beam and rivet with care, could emerge stronger than before, able to bear more than you ever thought possible. I'd learned it the hard way. This time, after so much upheaval, I'd built something lasting, not just a company, but a foundation of trust. And standing there in the autumn sunlight, with Andrea by my side and a new chapter ahead, I knew I'd finally gotten it right.